One of the most dangerous things you can do in a marriage is speak words that diminish your spouse's worth. Because here's the truth, actions may bruise for a moment, but words cut into the soul. And once they're spoken, they echo, they linger, they replay in the mind of the one who received them, sometimes for years. You may forget the words you said in frustration, but your spouse will often remember them long after the moment has passed. Words have weight, and when those words attack identity, value, or dignity, they do more than just hurt feelings. They fracture trust. Psychologists have long noted that humans are meaning-seeking beings. We are constantly interpreting life through the lens of language. Words don't just describe reality, they shape reality. When you tell someone they are inadequate, unworthy, or unlovable, those words begin to plant themselves like seeds in their subconscious. And over time, they start to bear fruit. Your spouse may begin to second-guess themselves, withdraw emotionally, or even distance themselves from you, not because they don't love you, but because your words told them they weren't safe being fully themselves around you. And this is particularly destructive in marriage, because marriage is supposed to be the safest place on earth. When you stood at the altar, you weren't just saying "I do" to sharing a house or a bank account. You were promising to be the one person your spouse could count on, to guard their heart, to cover their vulnerabilities, to affirm their worth when the rest of the world tries to diminish it. The workplace may not value them, society may ignore them, but at home, in your presence, they should feel seen, honored, and cherished. That is what covenant is meant to protect. But when you use words that belittle or shame, you reverse that sacred calling. You take the very place that was supposed to heal, and you make it the place that wounds. This is why Scripture says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Your words can either breathe life into your spouse's soul, or slowly suffocate their spirit. And many marriages don't die from some dramatic betrayal. They die slowly, over time, from careless words that chip away at the foundation of worth. Let me give you an example. Phrases like, "You're just like your mother," or "You'll never change," may seem small in the heat of the moment. But those words carry messages deeper than the sentence itself. What your spouse actually hears is, "You are doomed to failure. You are incapable of growth. I do not believe in you." And when someone feels their partner doesn't believe in them, the very glue that holds intimacy together begins to weaken. Or consider the way comparisons function. When you say, "Why can't you be more like so-and-so?" you're not just expressing disappointment. You're telling your spouse, "You are not enough as you are." That cuts at the root of identity. And when identity is under attack, love feels unsafe. You may think you're pushing them toward improvement, but what you're actually doing is pushing them away from intimacy. Now, none of this means we can't express frustration or correct problems, but there is a way to address issues without demeaning the person. You can challenge behavior while still affirming worth. You can say, "I need you to be more present at dinner," without saying, "You never care about this family." One statement critiques the action, the other attacks the identity. And it's the difference between building intimacy and destroying it. What's interesting is that neuroscience even backs this up. Studies show that the brain reacts to rejection and negative words in the same way it reacts to physical pain. That means when you diminish your spouse with words, you are literally inflicting wounds that feel as real to the body as being struck. But unlike physical bruises, these wounds are invisible, and because they're invisible, they often go unacknowledged. Your spouse may smile and move on, but inside the injury lingers. And here's the sobering part. The people we love most are often the people we wound the most with our words. Because we feel comfortable, because we drop our guard, because we forget that familiarity does not give us license to dishonor. In fact, familiarity should heighten our responsibility. The closer you are to someone, the more powerful your words become, which means the more carefully you must choose them. But here's the good news. The same tongue that can wound can also heal. The same mouth that can diminish can also elevate. Imagine what would happen if instead of tearing down, you made it your mission to build your spouse with your words. If instead of pointing out every weakness, you highlighted their strengths. If instead of careless criticism, you gave intentional affirmation. Over time, those words would plant seeds too, but seeds of confidence, of security, of love that grows deeper instead of thinner. Marriage thrives not in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of consistent honor. You will argue, you will disagree, you will face stress. But if your spouse knows, beyond any doubt, that even in the tension you will never attack their worth, then conflict becomes a place of growth instead of destruction. Because safety creates space for honesty, and honesty allows for healing. So let me challenge you before you speak. Ask yourself, will these words build or break? Will they heal or harm? Will they remind my spouse of their worth, or will they diminish it? That small pause may be the difference between planting life or sowing death. Closing statement: your spouse's heart is a garden entrusted to your care. Every word you speak is a seed. So choose wisely, because one day you will eat the fruit of the words you planted. One of the most damaging things you can say in a marriage, even in the heat of conflict, is any form of a threat to the covenant itself. Words like, maybe I should just leave, or I don't need this, I can do better on my own, might feel like a weapon to win an argument, but what they really do is weaken the very foundation you're standing on. You may think you're just expressing anger in the moment, but every time you pull out the thread of abandonment, you chip away at the sense of security your spouse needs to feel in order for love to flourish. Marriage was never designed to function under constant fear. If your spouse is always wondering if this fight, this mistake, or this disagreement will be the one that drives you out the door, they cannot feel safe enough to be fully open with you. Love requires risk. Intimacy requires vulnerability. But vulnerability can only exist where there is trust that the other person will not weaponize your weaknesses against you or dangle the possibility of leaving over your head. When threats enter the equation, walls go up. And when walls go up, intimacy goes down. Think about it like this: if a house is built on shaky ground, no one inside feels safe. Every creak, every rumble makes you wonder if the whole structure is about to collapse. That's what threats do to a marriage. They create instability. They make every argument feel like an earthquake. Instead of dealing with the issue at hand, your spouse's mind begins to spiral. Are they serious? Are they really going to leave? What happens to me, to the kids, to our future? Suddenly the focus shifts from resolving the conflict to just trying to survive the fear of abandonment. And this is why Scripture is so clear about the covenant of marriage. What God has joined together, let no man separate. Covenant is not a contract you break when things get hard. It is a vow you honor, especially when things get hard. Threats to leave turn a covenant into a negotiation, and marriage was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to be nurtured. Now some people use threats as a way to get control. They believe that if they create fear, they'll gain power. But let me tell you, any power built on fear is temporary and fragile. It may get you silence in the moment, but it will cost you respect in the long run. Fear-based power doesn't create intimacy, it creates distance. Your spouse may comply outwardly, but inwardly their heart begins to retreat. And once the heart retreats, it's only a matter of time before the relationship feels empty, even if you're still in the same house. Others use threats out of desperation. They don't really mean to leave, but they want to express the depth of their frustration. But words spoken in anger still leave scars. You may not intend to burn down the house, but if you keep lighting matches, eventually something will catch fire. Over time, repeated threats teach your spouse not to trust your words at all. They either live in constant fear that one day you'll make good on your threats, or they begin to dismiss everything you say because they assume it's just another empty warning. Either way, trust erodes. Psychologists tell us that secure relationships are the foundation for emotional health. When someone feels securely attached, they thrive, they take risks, they grow, they give their best. But when someone feels insecure, when they are constantly afraid of rejection or abandonment, they shut down, They protect themselves. They stop giving fully because they don't want to be left exposed. And here's the paradox. The very threats people use in an attempt to get more from their spouse usually end up producing the opposite. Instead of creating closeness, they create distance. Instead of motivating change, they paralyze growth. So what's the alternative? Instead of threatening to leave, communicate your needs with clarity and respect. Instead of saying, "I can't live like this, maybe I should go," say, "When this happens, it hurts me deeply. I need us to work on this if we're going to move forward in a healthy way." One response tears at the covenant, the other strengthens it. One creates fear, the other invites growth. It's important to remember that commitment is not about staying only when it's easy. True commitment is tested when it's hard. Anybody can love when everything is smooth, but the real depth of love shows itself when storms come. That's why vows include words like "for better" or worse, "for richer" or "poorer," in sickness and in health. They are not poetic filler. They are reminders that marriage is not sustained by convenience, but by covenant. Now let's be clear, there are situations such as abuse, betrayal, or unrepentant toxicity, where separation may be necessary for safety and healing. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about using threats casually, manipulatively, or recklessly in the normal conflicts of marriage. That is never constructive. That is never godly. That is never love. Because at the end of the day, love is not about holding the exit door open. It's about locking the door and throwing away the key. Love says, "We may disagree, we may struggle, we may not see eye to eye right now, but leaving is not an option. We're going to work this out, because we are in this together." That is the soil in which intimacy grows. That is the security that allows vulnerability. That is the kind of commitment that makes a marriage unshakable. Closing statement: never let your spouse live in fear that your love is conditional or temporary. When you remove the threat of abandonment, you create the safety that makes true intimacy possible, because love can only grow where commitment is sure. Few words cut deeper in a marriage than comparisons. When you say, "Why can't you be more like him?" or "She does this better than you," you're not just pointing out a shortcoming, you're telling your spouse that who they are is not enough. And when someone feels they're constantly measured against an external standard, they stop seeing themselves as a partner and start feeling like a project that will never measure up. Comparison is corrosive. It eats away at value, dignity, and trust. It tells your spouse, "I see you, but I don't celebrate you. I tolerate you, but I wish you were someone else." That message may not be what you intended, but it is what is received. And once it settles in, insecurity grows, resentment takes root, a wedge forms, often so subtly that you don't notice it until it's hardened into distance. At its core, comparison is a failure to honor uniqueness. God never intended your spouse to be anyone else. He didn't design your wife to be like your coworker. He didn't design your husband to be like your father, your friend, or a celebrity you admire. He designed them to be them, distinct, imperfect, gifted in their own way. When you marry someone, you are choosing their whole story, their strengths, their weaknesses, their quirks, their potential. To then compare them to someone else is to betray the very choice you made. And let's be honest, comparison doesn't just hurt the one being compared, it poisons the one doing the comparing. Because once you start down that road, you never find satisfaction. There will always be someone who seems smarter, richer, kinder, more attentive, or more attractive. The comparison game has no finish line. It's a treadmill that wears you out while taking you nowhere. And worse, it blinds you to the treasure you already have. Think about this. When you compare your spouse to someone else, you're focusing on what they lack instead of what they bring. You highlight the 10% that frustrates you while overlooking the 90% that blesses you. It's like staring at a scratch on a diamond and forgetting that you're holding something rare and priceless. Every time you bring up another person as the standard, you diminish your spouse's sense of worth, but you also diminish your own ability to see the value right in front of you. Psychologically, constant comparison creates performance pressure. Your spouse begins to feel like they're always auditioning for your love, like it could be revoked if they don't hit the right notes. And performance-based love is not love at all. It's conditional approval. Real love doesn't say, I'll value you if you meet my expectations. Real love says, I value you because you are mine. That is the kind of love that mirrors God's love for us. He doesn't compare us to the saints, the prophets, or the apostles. He doesn't say, why can't you pray like them, preach like them, serve like them? He sees us in our uniqueness and says, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I love you with an everlasting love. If that is how God loves us, how can we justify loving our spouse any less? Let me take this a little deeper. Comparisons don't only wound the heart, they attack identity. When you say, why can't you be more like so-and-so? What your spouse hears is who you are is insufficient. Over time, they may start to believe it. They may withdraw, stop trying, or even shut down emotionally, because the constant message is that nothing they do will ever be enough. And when a person feels they can't win, eventually they stop playing the game. That's how marriages drift into quiet detachment, not because of one big betrayal, but because of 1,000 small comparisons that drain the joy out of the relationship. But here's the good news. The antidote to comparison is gratitude. When you choose to notice and affirm what your spouse does right, you reinforce their value, instead of undermining it. When you speak life, I appreciate how hard you work. I love the way you make me laugh. I'm grateful for your support. You build security, and security fuels intimacy. Gratitude shifts your focus from what's missing to what's present, from what frustrates you to what blesses you. Now, let's get practical. If you've caught yourself comparing, stop and ask what's driving it. Often it's not really about the other person at all. Sometimes it's about our own dissatisfaction, our own restlessness, our own unhealed wounds. We project them onto our spouse, and then imagine that someone else could fill the void. But the truth is, no human being can complete you. No spouse can meet every need, or erase every insecurity. Only God can do that. And when you release your spouse from the impossible task of being everything for you, you free yourself to appreciate them for who they truly are. Here's something worth remembering. The grass always looks greener where you water it. If you invest time, attention, and affirmation into your spouse, their qualities will shine brighter. If you spend your energy admiring someone else's lawn, you'll neglect your own, and it will wither. Comparison is not only unkind, it's unwise. It diverts energy away from nurturing the relationship that actually belongs to you. Marriage thrives not when partners are flawless, but when partners are faithful. Not when they measure up to external standards, but when they are celebrated for their unique identity. And when you refuse to weaponize comparisons, you create the kind of environment where your spouse feels safe to grow. You don't need them to be someone else, because you see the value in who they are becoming right beside you. Closing statement: never let the shadow of comparison eclipse the light of gratitude in your marriage. When you honor your spouse for who they are, you not only preserve their value, you protect the covenant itself. Because love doesn't compare, love commits. Few statements are as damaging in marriage as the words, maybe we should just divorce, or I don't need you, I can walk away. These phrases are often spoken in the heat of an argument, thrown out like weapons to wound the other person, or to gain the upper hand. But what they actually do is erode the very foundation on which marriage is built: trust and security. When two people join their lives in covenant, they're not just signing a contract, they're making a promise to be each other's anchor in a storm. That covenant says, even when it's hard, I'm not going anywhere. But when threats of abandonment enter the conversation, they break that anchor loose. They turn security into uncertainty. They plant seeds of fear in the heart of the one you're supposed to protect. And when fear replaces trust, intimacy begins to die. Psychologists who study attachment say that human beings crave stability in their closest relationships. We can handle conflict, disagreement, and even disappointment if we know the relationship itself is not at risk. But when the bond feels fragile, when love feels conditional, the nervous system shifts into self-protection. Instead of leaning in, your spouse begins to pull away. Instead of working toward resolution, they start preparing for survival. And once that defensive posture takes over, genuine intimacy becomes almost impossible. This is why using the threat of divorce, or even suggesting the possibility, creates such deep wounds. It tells your spouse, you are only secure here, as long as you meet my expectations. And that turns marriage from a covenant into a contract, where love can be canceled at any time. That's not the biblical model, and it's not the path to a lasting relationship. Marriage, by design, is meant to be the safest human relationship we'll ever have. If the person you trust most hints at leaving when things get tough, the very core of that safety is shattered. Think of it this way. Imagine building a house, but every time a storm cloud appears, someone threatens to bulldoze the foundation. How safe would you feel inside that home? How restful would your nights be? That's what happens emotionally when threats of abandonment are used in marriage. Your spouse may stay physically, but emotionally, they'll always be waiting for the bulldozer. That constant state of unease creates distance, suspicion, and often bitterness. Now, sometimes people justify these threats by saying, I didn't mean it, I was just angry. But here's the sobering truth. Your spouse doesn't experience the intent, they experience the words. And once the words are out, they cannot be unheard. They become a part of the relational memory, something that resurfaces whenever conflict arises again. Even if you apologize, the seed of doubt has already been planted. And here's what makes it worse. Once threats of divorce enter a marriage, they often escalate. The first time it's said, it may feel shocking, but the second or third time, it starts to lose its weight. It becomes a recurring weapon in arguments, which only deepens the instability. Before long, the relationship isn't about solving problems together, it's about surviving the next round of threats. That's no way to live, and it's certainly no way to love. But let me offer a different perspective. Instead of using the possibility of leaving as leverage, imagine what could happen if you made it clear, even in your hardest moments, that leaving is not an option. That commitment doesn't mean you ignore issues, or stay silent about problems. On the contrary, it means you take problems seriously, because the relationship is too valuable to jeopardize. When both partners know the covenant is unshakable, they can face conflict with courage, instead of fear. They can argue without wondering if the argument will end the marriage. That security creates the space for growth, because it anchors both people in the assurance that they are not fighting against each other, but fighting for the relationship. Philosophically, this is about covenant love versus contractual love. A contract says, as long as you perform, I'll stay. A covenant says, even when you fail, I'm still here. That doesn't mean tolerating abuse, or living without boundaries. Those are separate issues. What it does mean is that ordinary conflict, disappointment, and imperfection are not deal breakers. They are opportunities to grow together without fear of abandonment. Practically speaking, if you've ever used threats of divorce or abandonment, the path forward begins with repentance and reassurance. It requires going back to your spouse and saying, I was wrong to use those words. I want you to know that no matter how hard things get, I am committed to you. We may have to work through struggles, but walking away is not how I will handle them. That kind of reassurance can begin to heal the fear those threats created, and over time, consistent words and actions can rebuild the trust that was shaken. Let's also be clear, true strength in marriage is not shown in walking away when it's hard. It's shown in staying and working things out. Anyone can quit, anyone can threaten, but it takes courage, discipline, and maturity to lean into covenant when emotions are running high. It takes wisdom to pause before speaking and to ask, will this word build security or destroy it? It takes humility to admit, I don't want to win this argument at the cost of losing my spouse's trust. Marriage is tested, not when things are easy, but when things are difficult, and it's in those difficult moments that your words matter most. If you can hold on to commitment when the storm is raging, then the calm will bring a deeper intimacy than you had before. But if you resort to threats, you may win the argument, but you will lose something far more valuable, the sense of safety that makes intimacy possible. Closing statement: never use the language of abandonment to solve the problems of covenant. When you remove the exit doors,
You force yourselves to find a way through the fire together, and it's in that commitment, not in threats, that true love and lasting marriages are built.